Hello guys and welcome back to my YouTube show. Today I'm going to make a new topic on the history of ancient Greece, where I will be talking about the history of ancient Greece, which was one of the two important Western civilizations after Rome, after Rome, the Roman civilization. And so in this video I'm going to talk about, in the episode 1 of my new series, The History of Ancient Greece, I'm going to talk about the Odyssey story, which was one of the books I read last summer in June and July of 2018, which I read last summer. And here is the Odyssey book, which I read over the summer. Now, this book is the story of the story of Odysseus, who was the king of Ithaca. In this book, they talk about him and his travels, his attempts to travel back to Ithaca, where he was supposed to be at the time, where he was the king of at Ithaca, which is in Greece today, or it was in ancient Greece at the time. So this book, they talk about it in here, and they talk about parts of the Trojan War in this book. So that was a very interesting book I read last summer because I found it very interesting, and then I learned some things from the book I didn't know about. I learned about. So I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the Odyssey, and the story of Odysseus, who was the king of Ithaca. So the story takes place during the Trojan War, while the Trojans were fighting the Greeks at the time. And so it was known as the Trojan War, which was a legendary war between the Trojans and the Greeks that lasted for 10 years. And the war ended when the Greeks brought a Trojan horse into the city of Troy. It was a Trojan horse. It was a Trojan horse, and the Greeks put the Greek people in the Trojan horse, and they put the troops in the Greeks in the Trojan horse, and they put it in the city of Troy, and they left it there, basically, and they left it in the city of Troy, and then the Greeks got out of the horse and they burned the city of Troy to the ground. And that was where Achilles died, when he was shot in the ankle. Because if you remember, in many movies, or if you read on Wikipedia, Achilles was shot in the heel, because if you remember, his mother put all of his body, but except his leg. He didn't put his leg or his heel in the water. It was magical water. So that was his weak spot. So Achilles was shot in the ankle and the heel by a Trojan soldier. He was killed when Troy was burned to the ground. And after the city of Troy was burned to the ground, all women and children were sold into slavery. The population of Troy was sold into slavery. So after that, Odysseus was still on an island. If I remember, he was on an island for some time. And basically he stayed there because he was trying to get back home to the Ithaca, where he was the king. And his wife was Penelope, that was Odysseus's wife. And his children were Telemachus and Telegonus, who was his two parents. And he stayed in that island for some time. I believe it was for 7 years. He stayed in the island for some time, and then he stayed there with his Greek comrades, his Greek soldiers. So they stayed there for some time, and then I even remember reading from the book. Odysseus said, "Don't eat I think it was a peach or something, or I'm trying to remember what it was. It was some fruit. I don't remember the exact fruit. He just said that don't lick the fruit, don't lick the fruit juice off of that fruit because you don't know if it's poisonous. Just don't even lick it. That's what Odysseus said to the Greek troops, the Greek soldiers, while he was on that island. And then I remember one of the Greek soldiers, the Greek troops, went into this cave, and they went into this cave, and they also met a cyclops, and the Greek soldiers tried to escape the cave, but then they were too late because the cyclops started beating them and eating them. A cyclops was this monster who had one eye. That was a cyclops. That's what basically a cyclops is. They basically had a one eye. And so Odysseus went into the cave, and then Odysseus was in the cave, and then the Cyclops said, "Who are you? What's your name?" And then Odysseus said, "It's No Man. I am No Man." And then the Cyclops said, "No Man, so that's your name, huh?" And Odysseus stayed in the cave for some time, and he actually helped his troops escape the the cave where the Cyclops was in. And so Odysseus came up with a plan. He came up with a plan to escape the cave, and he made something sharp. It was something sharp. I remember it was from the cave. It was from on top of the cave. I think it was like a spike, and they made. I think it was like a spear from what I remember reading from the book. It was a spear from the cave, a very sharp point. It was like a rock, and so Odysseus put it in the Cyclops' eye, and then Odysseus and his troops escaped the cave where they were at the time. The Cyclops was in pain, and was in pain crying because that spike went into his eye. And then the Cyclops heard him screaming from the cave, and the Cyclops said, "Oh, what hurt you? What's the matter? What's wrong? Why are you screaming?" And the Cyclops said, "No man's hurting me. No one's hurting me." And the other Cyclops said, "No one's hurting you? No one's hurting you, so what?" And so those were one of the stories of Odysseus while he was on that island. And also, he was going to, I think this was when he was traveling to, and his troops were building a ship for him so he could travel back to Ithaca. And he didn't trust anyone because he thought everybody was lying. And that's also an important survival skill. You don't trust anyone. That's what Odysseus thought, because he didn't trust anybody because he thought they were lying. And so he had to check the ship himself to see if the ship was fine. And then he went to go sail to Ithaca. And then from what I remember, he was trying to go back to Ithaca. And then he was actually, Poseidon, who was the god of the sea, stopped Odysseus because Odysseus killed Poseidon's son. So that's the reason why Poseidon tried to kill Odysseus while he was traveling back to Troy. No, not Troy, sorry. Ithaca, where he was the king there. And then he actually survived. His ship was all destroyed because Poseidon destroyed his ship while he was attempting to go back to Troy. No, not Troy. Ithaca. So he was trying to go back to Ithaca, and then the Poseidon destroyed his ship, and actually he survived. And I think it was a goddess, saved him from being killed from Poseidon. And then he was found on this island. And some goddess gave him clothes so he could have clothes to wear. And so I think it was one of the I think it was Nessica. I think it was a goddess, I believe, helped him build a ship so he could travel back to Troy. and the ship was all ready, and so he decided to go back to Troy. No, not Troy. He decided to go back to Ithaca. So, and also his wife was still the queen of of Ithaca, and her son, and she had a son, Telemachus. And so, and there was these group of men who wanted to marry Odysseus's wife. But then she said, I will get married whenever my husband dies. That's from what I remember reading. And so that's what I remember. And then the whole city of Ithaca started hearing stories about Odysseus's travels while he was absent in the city of Ithaca, which is in Greece. And so Odysseus he arrived in Ithaca, and he arrived in Ithaca, and then he found his son, I believe, and the son didn't know who he was at the time. And then his son said, no, the father said, where are we? What city are we in? And the son said, you're in Ithaca. And so he wanted to know what happened to his wife. And he went back to the palace where his wife was at the time. His son and his father went to the palace, and so there were these group of men, like I said, who wanted to marry Odysseus' wife, Penelope. And the group of men wanted to marry her, but then they said, the next day we will have a discussion about who's gonna marry Penelope. And then the group of men left the palace, and Odysseus, Telemachus, and Penelope started talking about a plan to stop the men from marrying her, to prevent a corruption in Ithaca. So the next day, they decided that who was gonna marry Penelope, who was his wife at the time. But the wife did not know who Odysseus was, because Odysseus wasn't in Ithaca for such a long time. And they started planning a plot to kill the men. And actually, they put a bow in the room, and then he shot the bow, and the arrow just like was flinging around the palace, and it actually killed the men that were trying to marry Penelope. And so the group of men, some of the men were killed, and they actually escaped the palace following that plan. And then the city of Troy and the city of Ithaca, and Odysseus was still the king of Ithaca after that happened. And so that's the story of the Odyssey, one of Homer's epic poems after the Iliad he wrote. The Iliad came first, and then the Odyssey came first. The Odyssey came second. So those were the two books he wrote during that time. And he wrote those two books, and also that's the story. So those are my thoughts on the Odyssey book I read last summer in June to July 2018. So this was the book I read, and I thought it was pretty interesting to read, because I learned some new things from the book, and I thought it was very cool to read it. And it was a great opportunity to read this book. So those are my thoughts on the Odyssey book, the story of Odysseus' travels back to Ithaca. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you learned something, and I will see you in my next video of the history of ancient Greece.